Okay, let's get into this. AI, I mean, it's just everywhere now.
Absolutely everywhere.
And its growth has, well, it sent NVIDIA into the stratosphere. They even briefly became the world's most valuable company.
Astronomical numbers, really.
But here's the thing that makes you scratch your head. AMD. They also make GPUs, right? The chips AI needs.
Yeah, they're a major player in GPUs.
So why aren't they enjoying that same, like, dominant position? What's going on there?
That's a fascinating question.
What we found digging into it is it's a real story. Old rivalries, some incredibly bold moves, and, well, it looks like a race against time now.
It does seem like a paradox, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You've got this huge AI-driven demand for chips.
Yeah, massive.
You'd think all the big chip guys would be riding the same wave. But the numbers tell a slightly different story for AMD, especially if you look at investor sentiment.
Exactly. And look, trying to keep up with every bit of tech news, all the market moves, it's a lot.
It's overwhelming sometimes.
So think of this deep dive as like your shortcut. We've sifted through the analysis, the trends, the history connecting AMD and AI to pull out the really key stuff.
Yep, distilled it down.
Our mission today is pretty straightforward.
Right.
Figure out why a big GPU company like AMD is facing these headwinds despite the AI hype and, what can we learn from it all?
And to really get that, we kind of have to rewind, don't we? Back to the 2000s.
Oh, yeah.
Back to that intense CPU battle between AMD and Intel. That really sets the stage.
That was a proper slugfest.
Yeah.
AMD and Intel just constantly going at it over who had the best processor.
Toe-to-toe.
But Intel had some serious built-in advantages, didn't they? Like, they made their own chips in their own factory.
Right, their own fabs. That's huge for cost and scale.
And they had those rock-solid deals with the big PC makers, Dell, HP.
Long-term partnerships.
Yeah.
Locked in. Having that in-house manufacturing gave Intel just incredible control, amazing efficiency.
Yeah.
And those deals basically guaranteed them a massive slice of the market.
Yeah.
But the sources we looked at also point to some very aggressive tactics.
Sinister almost feels like the word the analysis leans towards. It talks about these alleged first dollar rebates. Intel supposedly offered them to the big guys, Dell, HP. The deal was basically if you bought only Intel chips,
Exclusivity.
you'd get this big rebate on all the processors you bought that quarter. Sounds like Intel, sitting on piles of cash, was really trying to squeeze AMD out.
And it wasn't just rumor, right? The Japan Fair Trade Commission actually ruled against Intel on this.
That's right.
They found that these rebates given to 5 big Japanese computer makers, probably Sony, Toshiba, NEC, folks like that, though the ruling didn't name them specifically,
Right, kept it general.
violated Japan's competition laws. It just created this massive hurdle for AMD, even if their chips were better value or faster sometimes.
It doesn't matter.
These big PC companies were essentially locked in with Intel to get that full rebate. It really choked off competition.
And AMD fought back, obviously. They sued Intel, anti-competitive stuff.
They did.
And they eventually got a pretty hefty settlement. What was it, $1.25 billion?
Yeah, a big number.
You'd think, okay, that fixes things, right? Levels the playing field.
Well, it was definitely a win
Yeah.
legally, and the money surely helped.
Sure.
But it didn't magically fix AMD's deeper problems in the CPU fight. Intel still had its fabs, its deep relationships.
The core advantages remained.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, a big win, but it didn't really change the fundamental landscape or, crucially, free up the kind of cash AMD needed for what was coming next, GPUs.
That's the key, because even back then, you could see graphics were getting more and more important. Video games were exploding.
Huge market.
Intel had its basic integrated graphics, but AMD, they were just CPUs at that point. They were barely making money, needed something new.
A new direction, definitely.
So they made this enormous bet. 2006, they bought ATI, the Canadian GPU company.
For $5.4 billion.
A huge number, especially considering AMD's finances then.
And that's what raised eyebrows. The analysis highlights the skepticism around it. AMD was already financially stretched then. Right. And they funded this mostly with debt. By mid-2007, their total debt was basically the same as their entire year's revenue. It's highly leveraged.
Wow. And it wasn't an instant fix either. Despite having ATI's graphics tech, AMD still lost a ton of money.
Yeah, the losses were staggering. $2.8 billion in 2007, another $2.3 billion in 2008.
Oof. Part of that was Intel turning the screws with the price war, but it sounds like just merging ATI was tough too.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Integrating two big companies is never easy. Plus, AMD was still fighting those Intel lawsuits, right?
Yeah.
It's a huge distraction, drains resources.
Good point.
And there were whispers maybe they'd paid too much for ATI anyway. ATI had its own issues,
Right.
product delays, losing business from Motorola.
So a lot going on.
Yeah. And, by 2010, they actually dropped the ATI brand name altogether. That kind of tells you something about the integration challenges.
So things looked pretty bleak. Won the lawsuit, but still bleeding cash. Then came Lisa Su.
Right, a pivotal moment. She joined in 2012, senior VP in GM, then became CEO not long after.
And the sources really emphasized she walked into a company facing serious, serious problems.
What's really interesting about her is that deep engineering background. MIT degrees, time of Freescale, IBM, TI.
So she understood the tech inside out.
Exactly. Not just a finance person. She got the fundamentals.
And she saw the big problem. AMD was way too dependent on the PC market.
Which was flat or even shrinking.
Right. So her big move was diversification. Look beyond PCs, find new growth areas.
That pivot was absolutely crucial. Instead of just fighting harder for the same old PC slice,
Yeah.
she decided to use AMD's strengths. They had both CPUs and now GPUs for different things. And one of the first big wins, consoles.
Absolutely. She landed those huge deals with Microsoft for the Xbox One and Sony for the PlayStation 4.
And those numbers are just wild. Xbox One, maybe 58 million units shipped. Good number.
Pretty good.
But the PS4, over 117 million.
Wow.
Some analysis suggests the PS4 deal basically saved AMD. It was that big.
You can see it in the numbers, too. When she joined in 2012, something like 10% of AMD's money came from outside PCs.
Just 10%.
3 years later, it was 40%.
Huge shift. 40%. That just shows how successful that console push was.
But she didn't just rest on consoles. With that stability, AMD went back on the offensive in CPUs. 2017, Ryzen launches.
Ah, yes, Ryzen. That really shook the market up. High performance, lots of cores, good prices.
They started clawing back market share from Intel, really put the pressure on.
And Intel was kind of stumbling then, wasn't it? With delays on their 10-nanometer chips.
Exactly. Bad timing for Intel, great timing for AMD. And AMD even got a bit of a manufacturing edge for a while.
By switching to TSMC for 7-nanometer production in 2018.
Right. Now, you got to be careful comparing those nanometer numbers directly between companies.
True. The measurements aren't always apples to apples.
But it still gave AMD a boost in performance and efficiency then. Plus, their GPUs were becoming a really strong, more affordable alternative to NVIDIA.
And Lisa Su made that call, right? To pull back from things like mobile, stuff that wasn't making much money.
Yeah, focus. Focus on the core strengths.
And it paid off spectacularly.
Yeah.
You look at AMD stock price, under her, it went from maybe $2 a share in late 2012
Rock bottom.
to $92 by 2020. Just an incredible turnaround.
Truly remarkable.
Yeah.
But, and here's the twist, while AMD was fighting its way back in CPUs and hitting home runs in consoles, NVIDIA was playing a different game entirely.
A much longer game. Their eyes weren't just on the next quarter's PC sales.
No, they were looking way ahead. Long-term research, things like, well, AI and generative learning.
And the timeline is really striking when you look back. NVIDIA launched CUNY
Unified Device Architecture.
all the way back in 2006.
2006. That's ages ago in tech terms.
Think about what CUD did. It basically unlocked the massive parallel processing power of their GPUs for stuff other than graphics.
Like a superhighway for data.
Exactly. Opened up all those GPU lanes, which is perfect for AI number crunching. And crucially, it let programmers use normal languages like C++ plus Python
Stuff they already knew.
to tap into that GPU power for all sorts of general computing tasks. That early investment was just fundamental.
And because they did it so early, they built this whole ecosystem around CUDA, didn't they?
Absolutely. Researchers, scientists working on complex problems, especially AI, CUTA became their platform, the default choice.
And our sources point to that ImageNet competition in 2012 as a key moment.
Oh yeah, pivotal. This PhD student, Alex Krzyzewski,
Right.
enters this big AI image recognition contest. He uses just 2 standard NVIDIA gaming GPUs, GTX 580s.
Off the shelf.
And his AI model just blows the competition away, wins by a huge margin.
And that showed everyone crystal clear. GPUs were the way to go for this kind of AI.
And it was CUDA that made it accessible enough for him to do it relatively easily.
So NVIDIA saw that, saw the potential, and just doubled down hard.
Way before AI was the buzzword it is now. Even back in their 2016 reports, they were talking about the AI revolution. It's exponential growth.
Years before ChatGPT was even a concept most people knew.
Exactly. And they weren't just talking, they were building specific hardware. Chips like the Tesla P100 in 2016, the V100 in 2017,
Designed for AI.
purpose-built for AI and deep learning, they were laying the hardware foundations for the AI boom long before it actually hit the mainstream.
That long-term thinking, that consistent investment in both the chips and that crucial CADA software, it just gave them this incredible head start.
Huge advantage. Now, when the AI explosion really happened recently, AMD did initially get a piece of the action. The revenue jumped.
That's right. 2020 to 2022 looked pretty good for them on the revenue side. Seemed like they were catching the wave.
But then things got a bit more complicated. Revenue dipped the next year. And maybe more importantly, their profits took a big hit in both 2022 and 2023.
That suggests something shifted.
It does. It suggests maybe the AI researchers, the developers, the big buyers, they started focusing even more heavily on NVIDIA's platform.
And the analysis really hammers on one point. AMD just didn't have software quite like CUDA.
Yeah, that lack of a mature, widely adopted software ecosystem for their Radeon GPUs and AI, that was, and arguably still is, a critical gap.
They didn't have their own CUDA, basically.
Not one with the same level of development tools and community support. So realizing this was a major problem, AMD kicked off what they called their AI overdrive.
Right, trying to catch up fast.
Which involved some big moves, like buying Z-Links for $50 billion in early 2022.
That was huge. The idea was to get stronger in data centers, AI, using Z-Link's tech, right?
Exactly. Their networking, their adaptable chips. Though it's worth remembering that was an all-stock deal, which sometimes makes investors a bit nervous about dilution.
Okay. And they didn't stop there. Bought another company, Not AI, later that year.
Yep, October 2022. That was specifically about boosting their AI software side, trying to build better tools to support their own chips.
Makes sense. And then came their own big AI chip push, the MI300 series.
Announced November 2022. Data center accelerators aimed squarely at competing with NVIDIA's top AI GPUs.
And how did those do?
Well, there was definitely initial interest, strong demand reported. Some early forecasts were really high, maybe $8 billion.
Yeah.
Though those projections got revised down later, more like $5 billion.
Yeah.
So progress, yes. Customers were buying.
But still not NVIDIA numbers.
Nowhere near NVIDIA's scale, no. And more recently, their big Advancing AI event in 2024 got kind of a mixed reaction. Some analysts seemed a bit worried about their roadmap, whether they could grab as much market share as people hoped.
There was that quote from analyst Rick Schaefer.
Right. He basically said, look, AMD has done well building an AI business from almost nothing to maybe $4 billion in a year. That's impressive.
It is.
But investor expectations were, and are, just way higher. Still out of reach.
And that kind of gets to the heart of it, doesn't it?
I think so.
Yeah.
AMD, despite Lisa Su's incredible turnaround, they were fundamentally playing catch-up in AI.
Because of those earlier struggles.
Yeah. Those tough years meant they just didn't have the massive profits, the spare capital, to pour into foundational AI work, especially the software, as early and as heavily as NVIDIA did.
So the big takeaway here feels like, wow, Lisa Su pulled off an amazing comeback for AMD.
Yeah.
Huge wins in CPUs, massive success in consoles.
Absolutely. Transformed the company.
But NVIDIA's super early, super focused bet on AI research, and especially on building that critical CUDA software ecosystem that gave them an advantage in this AI boom that's just proven incredibly hard to overcome.
That's the core insight, I think. And it's relevant for you listening, too. It really highlights how important that long-term vision can be.
Yeah.
Making those big bets on foundations, even when the payoff isn't immediate or obvious, and it's that aha moment, realizing that software, the stuff that enables the hardware, can be just as critical, maybe even more critical in these big tech shifts.
So here's something to chew on. Can AMD, with all these recent investments, the acquisitions, the MI300 push, can they actually close that gap with NVIDIA in AI?
It's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? Or maybe $1 trillion now.
Right. Or is NVIDIA's head start, that entrenched CUDA ecosystem, just too much of a lead? And maybe think about the next big tech wave. What is it? And who's making those quiet foundational investments today that might decide who wins tomorrow?